Hello and welcome to Gothic Review. Today we're going to focus in depth on this very Gothic tarot deck, so Gothic in fact that it's called Gothic Tarot deck by Joseph Vargo. Here I'm showing you the box in which it comes. It features a nice looking vampire with a few female vampires that we refer to as the minunettes because they are his loyal servants. And on the back of it you can see the glyph of the company Monolith Graphics, the one that produced the card deck. And here we have the Major Arcana of this deck. And of course the Major Arcana follows the main principles of the typical Waite Rider deck, where it has the 22 cards numbered from 0 to 21, starting with this Fool card and ending with the World card, which is the 21, and I'm showing you both. But this specific deck has its own special features, of course, because all the tones here are dark and somber, as could be expected. The architecture here is Gothic, and at first I must say I didn't feel much power from that deck. It was just like pretty pictures, it was nice to look at and I was drawn to them, and I couldn't feel anything from the cards. But then I realized that when I meditate on them, all of a sudden those cards sort of acquire meaning and potency to the point where they remind me of my fears or accentuate them, exaggerate them, all kinds of things. So then I realized that it does have power, but it's like I had to be attuned to it to feel the what you would call an energy flowing from the card, or the power behind it, the power in the patterns, whatever you want to call it. But eventually I came to realize and like what those cards symbolized. The card deck came with some kind of a small booklet, you know, the kind that come in a limited capacity that give you brief meanings for the cards. And I cannot find it anymore, possibly lost because it was a trade. But anyway, with a deck like that, you don't really rely too much on the meaning that is proposed in the booklet anyway. The experienced reader looks at the card, at the images, and draws contrast between different elements of the card. And from there we get our meaning depending on the situation we're asking about. So for example, this Fool card, it features a young man all covered in a dark cloak, standing with something that looks a lot like a shadow of a dark wolf. And the way it would go would be like the 0, the Fool, it's supposed to symbolize a new beginning of sorts, but there are no pure new beginnings. Every new beginning contains elements of something old, some old baggage that you carry with you, and that wolf shows that the baggage is so shadowy it can remain invisible to your eye. And because of that, you're carrying it and are not aware of it, and then it suddenly springs to life. And in that lies the danger of the Fool card. The danger, the advantage. The Fool can be courageous on one hand because he doesn't see the danger, so he leaps ahead. And for that reason, the traditional tarot deck designed by Waite originally, and the ones following it like Crowley deck, they all show the Fool in bright colors and jumping into the abyss. But this one is a more dark, somber deck. So this one has somebody stepping into something that looks like a mysterious dark keep. They are about to be initiated into secrecy, and they're not aware of what dangers they're going to unleash with that act. And even maybe if it is an act worth following through, it might still contain elements of risk. So it has the positive of trying new things and the negative of being brash. Now, the next card features, of course, the Magician, numbered 1. And here you see the Magician card. And normally the Magician is somebody who has the know-how of how to address a situation, how to find the means to an end. Something needs to be done, they are the person who can do it. In this card, we see it represented in symbolic terms, where there is a bolt of lightning. In mythology of ancient Greece, Zeus would use the lightning bolt to express his will. And for that reason, this bolt of lightning can be interpreted as a connective sort of element, the kind that manifests something that didn't exist before into existence because it needs to become existent now, to be manifest, because it addresses the needs of a given situation. And it's very succinctly expressed with this bolt of lightning. Nothing is clearer than the magician enforcing his will onto the environment, changing it with a particular goal in mind. And then we have the High Priestess, again a traditional card in itself. Here it even features some traditional elements because it is showing a figure of a priestess standing between two pillars. Normally the letters over the two pillars are the Hebrew letters Bet and Gimel, that mean the house of the Lord or the house of mystery or the house of knowledge, depending on the interpretation. And basically, 2 being the number of balance, it lies between 2 different polarities. The High Priestess knows how to find the middle ground between the world of spirit and the world of the mundane. The mundane clients are the ones who need her help, and she needs to find a way to express the message from above in terms that the mundane population can understand. And in those somber card tone type of thing, we can see that this priestess is evenly leaning on both pillars, and again, none of those elements are accidental. The more you look at them, the more you understand the general meaning of the card, the more you think about the question asked from the cards. You would see more and more how all different elements combine, how they're contrasted, what is the meaning behind those contrasts. It's pretty much like a literary analysis. When you analyze a work of art, a work of literature, that's how you would analyze a card, especially like that, where its whole structure is based on the beauty and the contrast. Then we have the third card, that is of course the Empress. The power of the Empress relies not solely on this world, it's not specifically on the world of spirit either, like the High Priestess, but more on the power of the lineage and the blood and stuff like that. And this card is somewhat harder to interpret in more concrete terms, and for that reason it is easier when a particular question is asked. If somebody was asking, will I be happy with this guy, for example, then depending on if this card is upright or reversed, you would see particular elements of this card. You see that she is in a coffin here, so it might mean that the relationship might not work out, or because she is an Empress, it might mean that one of the partners could be dominating the other without even intending to. Or it could mean even general control issues on behalf of both partners, for example. So that was the Empress, and the next card is the Emperor that is featured on the very box of the deck itself. And here he is surrounded by what we call the minionettes, which are the female vampires. He himself is a master vampire, seemingly, which is appropriate, of course, for the Gothic deck. And again, here you would interpret his card based on the contrast. He is sitting, they are standing. Is it accidental? No, of course not. There is a meaning to it that he is more in control. He uses agents, and he can enforce his will indirectly. And it would be maybe subtlety and power that would be certain elements of a reading when this card shows up. And of course, there you can also see a raven perching on top of his throne, which is also not accidental. Raven symbolizing the messenger. It would show that the Emperor has many ways not only to enforce his will, but also to find out information about a given situation, which for a reading could bode well, because it would mean some kind of a positive understanding for the situation will be revealed eventually. Then we have the High Priest. Well, the High Priest is simply the balance to the High Priestess often enough. To see a particular reading, it's often just easy to see how the High Priest and the High Priestess are related to each other. Sometimes the High Priest in other decks is referred to as the Hierophant, which is just another word for the High Priest. Here, being of the Gothic variety, he's also in a coffin. His bat-like ears point to his possible origin as a Nosferatu, the kind that you might remember as Count Orlok from the famous Nosferatu movie. And then we have the Lovers. In many decks, the Lovers are shown side by side in a sort of balancing position, holding hands or arms, or touching at least. Here, the position seems to be a little bit different, appropriately again for the Gothic flair. There is somebody trying to bite on the neck of his lover, so it shows that the position between the two lovers is not even. It is of the initiator, of the teacher, and the disciple. And it doesn't matter that the mentor seems to be male and the initiate seems to be female, because the roles can be easily reversed. But there is an off-balance situation here between the lovers, and that makes this lovers card slightly different than many others in traditional decks. The Chariot, of course, is the next card. Normally, it can be two horses, sometimes it's two unicorns, sometimes it's two griffins. It's always two of something that can move really fast. It speaks of balance, or of being off balance if the card is in reversed. Here you see two dark mounts attached to a carriage, which is appropriate. It doesn't go too much out of the way of the traditional interpretation. If you want to think of certain mythological carriages, think Phaeton perhaps, with his role in Greek mythology of putting the carriage of the sun out of balance. This is not an accidental comparison. The founder of the traditional deck, Rider Waite, himself spoke of it in his pictorial guide to the tarot, and he was very much aware of all the world mythology, so this meaning is entirely purposeful. The next card we see is here Strength, number 8. It is an angel with a flaming sword. In this deck, sometimes it shows as a lion, sometimes it shows as other attributes of strength. The flaming sword is, of course, reminiscent of the angel that was guarding the Garden of Eden after men were banished from it and preventing them from coming back in. So this is the reverse side of strength, where it serves to protect against something that possibly does not need defense against, where normal attributes of strength have to do with courage and determination to do an action. This one is more on the preventive side instead. Again, the specialty of this Gothic deck, which I found very entertaining. And then we have the Hermit. The Hermit shows this maybe slightly vampiric or goblinish character, pointing somewhere outward, possibly vampiric because there are also bats in the background, and it is a Gothic deck, so of course vampires are the staple of the Gothic culture, so it is very likely for it to be. Again, normally the Hermit is somebody who sits by himself, isolated, contemplating, trying to find wisdom inside. Here, this is not entirely the case. This kind of a hermit tries to interact with his environment a little bit, tries to bring out his wisdom to the outside world to apply it. So again, the specialty of the Gothic deck that is not always encountered in traditional decks. And the traditional next card is Wheel of Fortune. This one seems in a sense less Gothic to me than many others because of the golden colors as opposed to the usual black background, but the meaning is still the same. There's the Wheel of Fortune, the uncontrollable forces that can work in your favor, against your favor, that are neutral to you, even though it's easy to judge them as if they weren't. We have this special Celtic knot that symbolizes cycles, the trichera, and on the sides of it we see perhaps a wyvern or a salamander maybe, but either way they are also traditional enough. One variation or another shows up in many decks. And again, it just shows the forces being balanced. The ones for you, the ones against you, they are at a standstill. And maybe an action could bring them out in your favor or against it if it's an ill-conceived action. Then we have 11. This is, again, some kind of a restrictive element of strength, where the woman is being restrained from her own impulses. And this one is a more traditional card, as sometimes it shows that a person is strong when they are able to control their impulses, to control their nature. This is part of the traditional attribute of strength. Although, of course, the animal next to the girl shown on the picture, the griffin, is nothing traditional like that. Some decks do show griffins on different occasions, but usually not in association with the strength card. But given the fact that strength is often portrayed as a lion, griffin does make sense here because of its composite features. The next card is the Hangman. Of course, it has bat-like wings. That is traditional because bats are the ones among the animals known to hang upside down. And just like in traditional decks, it's supposed to give you a specialized perspective from a different end that you don't normally see. And this one is performed with a Gothic flair appropriately for the general theme of the deck, but seems like it follows the traditional interpretations. Next, as always, we have Death. Here it's done like a type of a Grim Reaper / Scarecrow, which is nice combining two traditional elements of horror in one. Then we have the Raven and the Half Moon and the Cross. All of those elements, sometimes they lack on some decks, but they usually show up on others, so they're all optional. And in this case, Death, as in many others, is simply the sowing and the reaping of the results of what you do. So if you want good results, you do a certain thing. If you want bad results, you do a certain thing. Death is just the natural conclusion of your actions and nothing else. Many people, beginners to tarot, interpret death as something scary. Sometimes it's a change, sometimes it's a transformation, but in this case, it's simply the logical conclusion of a project that began earlier. But nothing scary, just symbolic usually. Then we have Temperance. This is a witch or maybe a demoness standing with two chalices over a cauldron, trying to concoct something or other. And this is the Gothic version of the regular temperance idea, where you have emotions trying to get out of control, and sometimes those emotions tell you something good to do. In this case, it seems like instead of just restraining the emotions as is done in traditional tarot decks, here we see two chalices, which means that the emotions would be again evenly balanced. And a lot of this deck is about balance, which I found rather likable for something that's supposed to be Gothic and maybe for some people more scary. And instead here it's all about evening things out against each other. Very pleasant. And then we have, of course, the Devil with his skeleton acolytes. The Gothic version here is clearly similar to all the traditional ones. Normally there are always two slaves to the devil or on the devil card. But in this case, they happen to be skeletons where normally they are just humans attached with chains. This card signifies, on one hand, temptation, on the other hand, choices, sometimes ill-considered choices, where something that you think you would like might not turn out the right way. The chains could signify slavery to some kind of a habit. If you have been drinking for a long time, it might be hard to stop, especially if this card shows up, or any kind of addictive behavior. This is the card that encourages it, because the addiction always tells you that it's a good thing to keep doing the same thing all over again. Whether it's emotional or physical addiction doesn't matter. But this meaning is very similar to all the traditional ones. And then, of course, there is the tower. Again, the Gothic interpretation. Many times you would see a traditional tower card on the stage of collapsing, which might be what Stephen King had in mind in his Dark Tower series. But here it's fully preserved, which is a good sign. It shows that the foundations for something you have been working on are very straight, they're not going to deteriorate, that you are on the right path, and you even have a healthy sense of caution, as can be seen from this hooded figure peeking backwards a little bit. And also he has the protection on the outside of the tower, which can be evidenced by this charming gargoyle sitting right next to him. Then we have the star. And this is again a pretty standard idea. The female angel is pouring down from the water, which is a telltale sign of the constellation Aquarius, which Rider Waite had in mind originally, and others before him, like Eliphas Levi or whichever occultist you subscribe to. And then at the background there's the typical star. The only thing is that, of course, the artist contrived all those images in a more Gothic outline, so the star is slightly less developed along traditional lines. It's slightly longer than I remember many others of being, but otherwise the symbols, the balance between the two chalices being poured from, it's all the same. The columns on which the angel is leaning is again not an accidental thing. It's about the firm support she needs to be able to do her thing, and again pretty traditional compared to other decks. Then we have the moon, and again the images are very familiar in themselves. They're the two figures reaching for each other. It is that instinctive impulse, instinctive guidance that we all have, that comes from places we don't always suspect, but still is just as true, just as powerful. But the Gothic aspect of this picture is represented by the two possibly devilish looking figures on the edges of the card, and that's its Gothic deviation. But otherwise it doesn't seem like it's majorly different from the traditional attributes of the instinctive guidance of the moon. And then we have the sun, and here the sun is entirely Gothic. I think it's slightly different from many other suns because most of the suns talk about daylight, where this sun specifically is on the background of darkness. I remember this card was one of those that gave me the most nightmares of all this deck. But it was in a good way and to a good end. It allowed me to understand certain issues, including the meaning of the card. If you look at the contrast here, it's evident that it's between the one who is carrying the guy with the wings and the one who is being carried, the girl with the wings. It might seem that the positions are clear here, he being able to carry her is the dominant one and she is the passive one, but that is not the truth of the matter. She is the actually the one who has the strength, where he is the passive recipient of her orders, and she allows herself to be carried, which was an unusual way to look at it, but that was my instinctive insight about this card. Then we have 20, the card of judgment. The positions of the one giving the judgment, the angel, and the one receiving it, the querent, are traditional enough. Just the background for them, of course, appropriately for the Gothic deck, they are darker and more Gothic, and you can see basically the hint of the cemetery at the background and the darker tones and the time of day being night. So all of those are the Gothic features, but otherwise the meanings are similar to the traditional one about judging, being judged, or refraining from judgment depending on the situation. Here, the question often determines the interpretation. And the final of the Major Arcana here, that is a very nice touch. It's the world, but done Gothic style. It seems like on top of it we see a certain hint possibly at Cthulhu with all of the tentacles. It could be just an accidental similarity, but the tentacles are not accidental at all. They show how things are connecting through invisible tendons of consciousness energy, whatever you want to call it. So this card is more holistic. It talks about the overall aspect of a thing, and it allows you to understand the general tone of the reading as opposed to the particular one you get from other cards. And otherwise it's similar enough in its meaning, if not application, to the traditional decks. And that was all for Major Arcana, 22 cards. Then we go and move on to typical Minor Arcana cards. All the 4 suits are pretty traditional. Here we have an example of a card of cups. Then we have another example of a card of wands. And the main thing about them is like each one is different, but the elements here are pretty similar. All the 4, the traditional associations of water, earth, air, fire. And the only difference is in the contrasts prevalent in each card, and you would have to notice the similarities and the differences, like one of those puzzles you probably do on Facebook where notice the 5 differences between this image and this image, except here it's more valuable possibly because it allows you to understand how the reading really goes. A cute little jester here to represent the card of swords. And a really nice horned devil or demon of swords. More demons or gargoyles, or possibly both. And you see that the similarities, of course, are that all of them are dark enough. No matter what else they do, they are always on a dark background, really detailed artwork, somber colors, fantastical animals and people and creatures. Many times you would see composite features. Sometimes you see contrasting features on one. Sometimes you see how their positions are different from each other. And those are the things to pay attention to: up versus down, opposite, turning head somewhere. All of those elements are important and signify a particular difference of meaning. And juxtaposition between sitting and lying, like in here there's this demoness that has somebody prone up who has the power. All of those things are important for this deck. But one way to use this deck, other than in meditation, you can see how inspiring those images are. Could be to make a story about the images you see, or to try to see them before you go to sleep, and then see what kind of interesting dreams you would have if you dare. Naturally, there are all the 78 cards, just like in many traditional decks, just the Gothic style. But here's an interesting card that might be worth trying to interpret briefly. Here we see this standing woman and a sitting gargoyle next to her. She is of the element of Pentacles, which of course symbolizes Earth. And you see that she has quite a bosom. Again, this is not accidental or perverse. It's the particular attribute of sexuality, physicality associated with this specific element of all the elements. And at the same time, the gargoyle has wings, so that would be the contrast that I would often play on, how the gargoyle has that element of air to an extent, even though it's made out of stone, which is an earth material, while she herself is of the earth. And underneath her feet is another type of goyle, which is one with the ram horns. And the fact that they are underneath, it shows that she uses that gargoyle as a support. And the fact that the horns are curved backwards symbolizes their special power, their attunement of sorts to the dangers ahead and how they are worthy to serve as her protection. Maybe they're her instincts that were honed over the years if she is a human person. But you have always to be creative with your interpretations. Usually it's not as straight as it may seem, and the contrast itself, whichever way you notice it, would be the one that would point out to you the major aspects of this card. But this was a card of Pentacles, which is one of the Minor Arcana. And then we have this interesting card of two gargoyles, one on top of the other. This is the card of Swords, which is an element of air. And here, the gargoyle that's supposed to be protective, the fact that there are two of it shows that the protection can be used in one or the other way. The fact that one of the gargoyles points at you, the reader, while the other points down, shows how that protection can be misused if it's misapplied, if it's deemed that protection is necessary against unnecessary dangers, the ones that are not really threatening you, but ones that maybe you used to treat as a danger, then you could misapply that protection. Or on the other hand, there are situations where the protection is really required, and if you don't use it, then you're risking something unpleasant. So both are possible tones for the reading, and only the overlaying cards would show you which protection you're really using, the correct one or the one that's hypothetical and would only threaten you more. Okay, and what else? Here we have a representative of the element of cups, which of course is water. And it shows the balancing aspects. There is an angel on one side and a winged skeleton on the other. The angel reminds of the good applications of the power of emotion. The winged skeleton reminds that they could make many things unpleasant if misapplied. The woman here is a ghost, so she might be acting based on her past, but she is also reading a book which allows her to learn new things that are not related to the past but to the present. So overall it's a very well balanced image, and again the negative or positive tone of this reading with this card will be established through the context of other cards. And finally, we have the representative of the element of wands, or the suit of wands, which corresponds to fire. And here we have, again, a sort of balance in a contrast. The king is sitting on his throne, but he is not fully sitting, he is half reclining, which is important. That means that maybe he is not fully in position, he needs to prepare. He is a little bit of balance. Then he is dead on the one hand, which places him closer to the earth, which maybe makes him more stabilized in his stagnation, but then he also has the wings which allow him to rise above the obstacles, to overcome his conditioning. So again, it's a very balanced image, and possibly the big scepter he's holding would serve as the representation of his will. The magician in this case would use a wand, but this king does not need a wand. He has something much bigger, which is the scepter, and he's not afraid to use it. That scepter will be the expression of his will. After he makes up his mind which course of action to take, he would use this particular tool to express his will. And so this gives you an understanding of how to see different cards, how to gauge them against each other, how to work with this specific deck, and how to work with decks in general. Thank you for watching this extended in-depth review of Gothic Tarot deck by Joseph Vargo, and hope you enjoyed it and would subscribe to see more of that kind. Thank you for watching.